I'm always asked the question, is hate innate? Is it hardwired? It's not. You do learn it from culture. But there are parts of our brains and our hormonal makeup that predispose us to preferring people we think are like us. And this is through evolution that this has occurred. So if you think about the multiple different types of human-like species throughout time, and where Homo sapiens championed, we won. We're very good at that because we cooperated better than any other species, ultimately. We are social beings. Human beings go mad if they don't actually have social interaction with other human beings. And that's because of evolution. And high cooperation and very effective cooperation throughout history meant that we basically dominated our planet. Completely dominated our planet. For the worse, I'd say right now with the climate change, etc. But it's because of that super cooperative spirit that we have that's ingrained in our biology, in our brains, that we are so successful. But there's a darker side to it. Left alone on its own, it's absolutely fine. You cooperate well with people you think are like you. But as soon as a member of an out-group comes close, and that could be anything. An out-group could be different gender, different race. It could be just a different sports team, right? As soon as an out-group enters the mix and they seem slightly threatening in some way, that preference for your in-group can be weaponized and turned against the out-group. Okay, and that's where we start to see prejudice. But what that outgroup is varies massively. Currently, we see it as race, sexual orientation, transgender identity, etc. Back in hunter-gatherer times, because of the limits of migration, there was no difference in skin color between tribes that encountered each other. There was just difference in location and so on. So the difference of the in-group and out-group back then was something completely different to what we might see today and perceive of what an in-group and out-group is. But under all those really kind of threatening conditions, our brains basically grew. And we have a part of the brain called the amygdala, which is like a little nutty structure at the base of our brain. We have two of them. And they are responsible for processing threat and fear. Oh. And it is a remarkable part of the brain. It's one of the first parts of the brain that evolved. It's precisely designed to keep us alive. We are super threat detecting machines because of it. Back in the days of hunter-gatherers, when we had saber-toothed cats, environmental disasters, storms, marauding tribes, that was our number one defense mechanism, the amygdala. It's so powerful, in fact, that it has a direct link to the optic nerve, which means that we see threats before the rest of our brain can even process what we're seeing. Before you even know what you're looking at, if it's a toaster or a face, the amygdala will, as in a flash, milliseconds, process.
A toaster or a face.
That's just a crazy example. It's from the book, but that's the only example I have. So the amygdala is fast but dumb. Okay, the amygdala is fast but dumb.
You've had teammates like that, haven't you?
I'm glad we went with teammates. Thank you.
But you've never been that fast.
Excellent.
But the problem with being fast but dumb is that you get these really fast fight or flight responses, right? So you get this, I'm going to throw my spear at this saber-tooth cat, or I'm going to run the other way. And we've all felt that kind of fight or flight response. And the amygdala is responsible for initiating that. The blood pumps, the adrenaline pumps. You feel superhuman. The strength increases. We've all heard those crazy examples of people lift cars off bodies after car crashes. That's the amygdala affecting your whole physiology. And it's a very powerful influence. But interestingly, it's also known to activate when white people look at black faces in brain scanners.
What?
Which is terrifying. So one of the very first brain scanning exercises in this space was to find out what parts of the brain processed hate and prejudice. Well, what's the brain doing? Even though we know that culture's to blame for turning a person prejudiced, what happens in the brain when they come up against what they perceive as a threat of some kind? So they put a bunch of white people in these fMRI scanners. You've probably been in an MRI scanner for lots of different reasons.
I'm claustrophobic, so I just...
Okay, you avoid them. Yeah, they're
No,
horrible.
I go in them, but I'm unconscious. I'm heavily doped up, so I couldn't tell you what they look like.
So they are. For the book, actually, I went in to one and had my own brain scan. I can tell you about my results in a minute. But they put you in and they show you black and white faces. Just flash them in front of the participants. And basically, every white participant in the study said, I'm not prejudiced, I'm pro-black. They did a little test outside the scanner called the implicit association test, which is this test that basically gets around direct questions of asking you racist or not. It's this very cool test that it's all about how quickly you press your keys on a keyboard and the black and white faces and good and bad words. I can't explain it right now because it's too complicated, but it tells the experimenter whether or not a person might be a bit prejudiced or pro-black or pro-white. And the results came back, and the folks that were said that they were pro-white and had a black face flashed in front of them, their amygdala lit up like a Christmas tree. They were processing that black face as threat, some form of threat. Now, whether or not that translates into prejudice is we're not sure. But what they found through subsequent studies after that was that the amygdala will process different color faces very differently for some people.
Did they do a reverse test with black people and white faces?
They did.
And what was the result?
The same.
Same.
Some black people also had the same threat response to other black faces. And that's culture.
And that's not based on
No.
the fact that they're genuinely prejudiced or starting to think that it was, well, that's how your brain's reacting because of what you've been involved in terms of your culture upbringing, where you're surround yourself with the same people that look like you because that's what we naturally do.
Absolutely.
And then it's just an automatic response of someone who's different. You're like, even if you don't want it to be, you're automatically feeling that.
But a really important point to make is that we have more than just the amygdala in our brains. We have what's also called the prefrontal cortex, this bit right here. That bit evolved after the amygdala, but it's way, way smarter than the amygdala. It's where all the decision-making, executive control. It's like the cockpit, basically, right? Everything else is like the engine and the flaps, and this is the cockpit of the mind. This is where you rationalize things. And when the amygdala makes a kind of quick snap judgment that might be like slightly racist kind of threat interpretation, all of a sudden, if you're motivated not to be prejudiced, you don't want to look prejudiced, it's uncool to be prejudiced in the culture, the culture or the group of friends that you're with, the prefrontal cortex will put the brakes on. It'll say, no, stand down, red alert. That's not. So I think a huge thing for me is kids and education. If you get kids early enough, give them the stability they need, give them the education they need, mix them as much as possible with as many different people as you can, you'll see a drop in prejudice and a drop in hate crime later down the line. And I mentioned the brain study at the beginning, right? You put kids in brain scanners, and they've done this. You put kids in brain scanners who've been in mixed schools with lots of black kids, lots of white kids. Their amygdala doesn't flash at all when they are presented with the black face in that scanner. And that's been repeated on adults. So when you mix people from different cultures and you get used to different faces, different cultures, different genders and everything else, and it's part of your fabric, you don't have those prejudices anymore. They're much less extreme. And I mean, the science, we know how to, from a lab perspective, we know how to stop prejudice. You have to mix people early. Practically speaking, how you get that out of the lab.
I was just about to say, like, it's easier said than done.
It is.
I'm brought up in a rural East Sussex town, and I grow up with family across the road. There's only one black family in the area, and that's. Do you know what I mean? It's like, unless you go to a big city or brought up in a big city where you can mix your kids and start it's going to take a long time down the road for these prejudices, whether it's race, homophobia, gender, to sort of change, unless you're constantly exposed on a day-to-day basis with your kids.
On Joe Marler Show.